Doc, I want to get to the Detroit Lions because, I feel like I have transitioned my mind from the beginning of the season saying what's different about these guys to every week they play, I'm seeing more and more grit and more differences in other regimes. I really like what I'm seeing out of these guys lately. They're so undermanned. They got a ton of guys on the injury list, and they just have a depleted roster and devoid of talent, much of it. And they're really young. What are you seeing through the first 5 weeks? Do you think I'm crazy, or do you think I'm onto something?
Wow, as you were speaking, I was thinking, wow, Ryan's the king of moral victories. Look, yes, oh, no.
Yes.
Fair.
Talk to him, Doc.
Yeah, I gotta give you guys the bottom line. And I put it on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. You look at situations in each game. Dan Campbell didn't learn from his previous mistakes. Now, look, you always have to preface this by saying the Lions' emphasis on winning is not super high. They're not living and dying with the wins this year. But when you look at one game in particular, this game against the Vikings, you had the game won. Jared Goff connected with the player off the streets and Kadero Hodge. You execute an aggressive play. Okay, now it's upon your defense. And what kind of defensive scheme were they trying to accomplish by giving up that many chunk yards? I'm of the opinion that, yes, on one side of the football, the Lions have been supreme in being aggressive on offense. But then you go to the defensive side of the football, just unleash the defensive line. Rush 4, rush 5. How are you not going to protect and guard Thielen and Jefferson late in the game? I think the coaching staff has cost this team a couple of victories. And specifically, if you just want to look late, that last 37-second sequence was atrocious by Aaron Glenn, especially after a quality performance holding the Vikings to less than 20 points. But within the game, I think that Aaron Glenn should be more aggressive and rush more than 3. I don't believe in moral victories. I thought that the coaching staff, with the talent that they have, could have at least 2 or 3 wins if some things would have shaken out differently schematically. No moral victories.
Yeah, 100%. You're right. I think we got caught up in, Ryan, you know what? I'm his teammate. We, as well as Matt, got caught up in the nation. The nation is on Dan Campbell's side. The nation saw the emotion at the press conference, and that's what I want to get to you about. What do you make of the emotion at the press conference last week on Monday? He was very emotional about the loss. He was very emotional about his players, and not being able to get that win, and maybe emotional because of everything you said, realizing he let those guys down.
Oh, guys, the life of an NFL head football coach.
I'm trying to be. Look, Doc. Here's the thing, and I struggle with this, and maybe not to step on your question, Braylon, but here's the thing that I struggle with too, because I'm like,
step away.
I expected this team to win. Well, I expected them to win the Super Bowl, but I expect them to win the Super Bowl every year. That's my first problem. But I legitimately expected them to win 5 or 6 games this year. They're probably going to win 3 or 4, max.
Or 2.
2 to 3.
Maybe 0. But I struggle with having realistic expectations for them. But you're not wrong, right? I mean, just a couple of weeks earlier in Baltimore, we saw on a 4th and 19 or whatever it was, 4th and 16,
after
4th and 19.
After
timeout, not having communication, rushing 3 guys. So what happens this week? We see them rushing 3 guys. So, I mean, I understand. I'm trying to not freak out over this roster and over these games. It's really hard to do, though. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to stay somewhat positive about these guys because they're just not very good.
Absolutely, and you're looking at global versus game to game. I think at this point in time, this is a 2-3 football team, just based on the fact that if you just handle schematics late differently against Baltimore and Minnesota, you get 2 wins. And like you've said, this was probably a 6-win football team, and you also have to factor in, which the organization will never do, every single week 2 more players head to IR. So this is not the same team that started the year. Every team battles injuries. But within each game, they're not a football team that can't compete at this level. So within the game that you just watched, this football game should have went in the W column for the Detroit Lions. If you just potentially rush 4 or 5, I think you were bringing pressure. I know some will say that, hey, maybe they would have, with the young secondary, given up the big play. But I think you go down swinging as opposed to having Kirk Cousins scan the field with all that time. It's not the best strategy. I think if you're going to go down swinging, then you go down being aggressive and, hey, calling some blitzes and see what happens. But collectively, I think that when you look at what's happening with the Detroit Lions, I'm very impressed with the fact that they are still competing. And to Braylon, your point, NFL coaches are spending 80, 90 hours at the facility. So when you're putting that much into it and you suffer heartbreak losses, I can understand the emotion. It's not easy to put in all that effort, all of that work to game plan, to make sure your guys are in the proper position, and then to have the game go down like that twice in less than a month. I would have taken an extra 10 minutes and potentially just gathered myself. But Dan Campbell, you can never fault him for being real. He wears his emotions on his sleeves, and as a media member and somebody who covers him daily, I respect him ultimately for the manner in which he conducts himself, because that's who he is.
Hey, Doc.
I would have taken the day like Urban Meyer, but that's just me.
Doc, sit tight. I got to take a 30-second break. We got more questions for you. We'll sit tight. We'll be back. Doc Maakaron. We got Doc Maakaron, SI Lions writer, also Detroit Sports Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Detroit Podcast.
And he always keeps it real.
Yes,
100%,
he does.
Baby.
And I love the back and forth, because I feel, Doc, like you're like my inner kind of struggle that I have, as a fan, as a media member, as somebody who tries to look at it objectively, as somebody who's so passionate about this fan base. It's like I have this push-pull.
You know what happened is you were just like Doc. You were going legitimately after the truth. You were speaking what you saw in the games, and you were calling it down the middle. But then the fans got after you. The fans
I don't care about that.
The fans were pulling about the Lions, making like, oh, you're going after him, you're going after him. And then it kind of, you kind of have a point, and you lightened up a little bit.
I don't care about what they say to me about it. That doesn't dictate how I feel about it. But like the end of that Chicago game into the Minnesota game, I thought they had no chance. Like I thought it was going to be 40-6 against Minnesota.
Yeah.
So when it wasn't, it kind of changed my mind towards it. Tom, you had a question for Doc?
I do. Hey, Doc, speaking of the transfer portal, you had a kid out there, and Trey Flowers, cornerback, Seattle. Maybe he wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but he's been around for 4 years, kind of knows the NFL. Probably better than anything we have right now in the secondary. And they're number 2 on the waiver wire, and they just, let him go, and now he's a Bengal.
Tom, I like it. I like where your head's at. You're always looking to add players. I'm the same way. Whenever there's an opportunity to add talent, you potentially want to do it. But now it's pretty much established. And you got to also remember, they went out to the practice squad of the Steelers, picked up Gilbert, and now because of the fact that you signed him, then he's going to be on your roster for the next 3 weeks. But look, Tom, you and I are both in the same camp that we want to upgrade every single week. We want to look at who's out there and who potentially could be added to this roster. But look, Trey Flowers struggled in Seattle, and he's a 26-year-old. This is just not where this organization's at. They want to look at Jerry Jacobs, who I'm going to, give him the nod. He's going to match up with Jamar Chase. Bless him, because I think Jamar's going to go off on him. If that's the game plan, you better give him some help, because of the fact Jamar is looking amazing in terms of the explosive plays. Please keep thoughts and prayers for Jerry Jacobs. He's about to get lit up.
All right, so Doc, if you think that's going to be the case this week, where does this team, I'll leave you with this, where does this team get their first win? Where do you see it? What's the next opportunity?
Are we looking at 0-8? Maybe the game against Philadelphia? Guys, it's really tough to really project that far ahead. Looking just to the Bengals game, I think if the Lions can potentially rally around Dan Campbell, the Bengals are not world beaters. I mean, I think that Joe Burrow can potentially be prone to mistakes if you get after him. I'm really impressed with Charles Harris, who is one of the players that has been brought in that has turned his career around. Former first-round pick and a player that has been raved about this week in practice, I believe 4 consecutive games with a sack. So you're looking for more of that. Unfortunately, this roster has been put together like a scrap heap by a bunch of players from the practice squad, so it's going to be tough. But if you don't get it this week against the Bengals, look out, because you could be staring 0-8, 0-9 right in the face. I hope that this team can really rally for their head coach and put one together. It's the first game back, after a heartbreaking loss, so I'm hoping to see this offense and defense put it together and be a little bit more competitive. They have a chance. I think it'll be another close contest. This one might be the one that you can get the W, but if you don't, man, it's going to be a long time before these Lions get a W.
The great Doc Maakaron, the Detroit Sports Podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Detroit Podcast. LionsWriterSI.com. Hey, Doc, we love talking to you, man. Thanks so much for the time, and we'll check back in with you next week.
Yes, sir.
I look forward to it. Go green. I think Michigan should enjoy this bye week because tough times are ahead.
We'll talk to you about that as well, my friend. We'll talk to you about that as well next week. Thanks. But Braylon, he mentioned Philadelphia as a potential win for the Detroit Lions.
It's not going to happen.
But the point is, I wanted to talk about Philadelphia.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, they won't beat Philly.
You talked about matchups. It's